think in my 40-plus years of journalism, I've never told a happy story. And I don't intend bucking tradition this evening. This evening's story begins on the morning of April 20th, 2019. 77-year-old Jack Blais drove his Chevrolet into the parking lot of the Montreal Lakeshore General Hospital. The retired police officer told the triage nurse he was suffering from stomach pain that was causing insomnia. She classified him as a P5, the least urgent category of an emergency patient. But even P5 patients are expected to see a physician within 120 minutes. He was admitted at 9:53 a.m. and would eventually get assigned to cubicle 7. As he waited, he must have noticed the long cord on the emergency button. 7 hours passed before the doctor entered cubicle 7. There he found Mr. Blais had strung a long cord over a coat hook. He told the doctor he had suicidal thoughts. A psychiatrist was called. It was deemed that Mr. Blais should go to a psychiatric hospital, but there were no beds in the preferred hospital. And so then it was thought the best thing for Mr. Blais would be to sleep on a cot or a stretcher in the corridor of the Lakeshore ER. Another 14 hours would pass. It was 7:30 a.m. when staff noticed Mr. Blais was missing. They found him in cubicle 7. He was dead. The emergency button cord strung around his neck. I think it's safe to speculate. I know we journalists don't like speculating, but I think it's safe to speculate that 14 hours on a gurney in ER was not the optimal protocol for treating suicidal ideation. Neither we nor the family would ever know the full details of how Jacques Blais died, were it not for the astute journalistic instincts and diligent work of Aaron Derfel, of the Montreal Gazette. Aaron, the health reporter, noticed a line in a Labour mediator's report on the Lakeshore General. It described the place as a ticking time bomb. He chose to take a closer look. Over 4 months, he developed inside sources, scoured Facebook pages for relatives of deceased, foraged through a forest of documentation, and sought expert opinion to corroborate his findings. The result of these endeavors was a robust 4-part series in the Montreal Gazette in which he revealed not just one egregious death at the Lakeshore emergency room, but 6. The details of the deaths are astonishing and painstakingly catalogued in the articles. I give you just 2 more examples. A 73-year-old man brought by ambulance to have a catheter changed, a routine procedure. His chart clearly stated he could have nothing by mouth. To protect his lungs, he could only be fed by a tube into his stomach. Despite that, he was spoon-fed medication with applesauce. He aspirated. The food did enter his lungs. He died in the ER. Another example, an 81-year-old man entered ER with the classic signs of imminent cardiac arrest and a medical history of severe heart problems. Derfel reports that protocol demands such patients be immediately put on a nitroglycerin IV and placed in a code room equipped with a panoply of life-saving equipment. The doctor should see someone in that condition within 15 minutes. None of that happened to the man we know as FC. He was put on a stretcher with a cardiac monitor in the middle of the ER. There he stayed for 2 days, complaining about severe chest pains to anyone who would listen. He was offered Tylenol. He was on the phone to his wife seeking moral support when he died of a massive heart attack. It's a worthy journalist and a brave news organization that accuses a hospital, its administrators, and the health minister of being culpable in 6 deaths. The series makes clear these people didn't die of their ailments. They died of neglect. Tears of neglect that sadly have resonance across the country. Politicians who ignored warnings, sloughed off pleas from desperate nurses, turned a deaf ear to whistleblowers. They and their mandarins failed to properly fund an ER that was built as a temporary structure in 1988, and the age and neglect had rendered into a groaning pile of arthritic bones no longer fit for purpose. Hence, the plague of malfunctioning equipment, the desperate shortage of stuff that actually worked, the blocked sight lines that hid patients from overworked nurses. Below the politicians and the mandarins were the managers who failed to recruit, train, properly staff an ER that was running well over capacity with 50% less staff than was required, who failed to invoke proper protocols on these deaths, failed to accept responsibility, failed to make necessary changes to operations. Emblematic of the dereliction is that long cord in cubicle 7 remained in place for 4 years after Mr. Blay died. It was removed only on the day that Aaron Duffel's first article was posted online. The series prompted profound changes, to Aaron's great credit. The paper reports that after just the first installment, the government announced an independent investigation into the Lakeshore General Hospital. That investigation largely confirmed the Gazette's findings. The final installment of the series was used by the hospital as a guidebook to make improvements on how to function as an ER. And at long last, the West Island Health Authority announced the construction of a $13 million modular ER at the Lakeshore Hospital. Also, one of the families launched a lawsuit based on Aaron's reporting. So if the Hillman Prize should go to someone who speaks for the powerless and who affects change, I can think he thoroughly deserves the Hillman Prize for local reporting, and God bless him.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Wow, what an honor and privilege to have received this award. I would like to congratulate my fellow honorees for their exceptional and impactful journalism. I would also like to, Neil, your introduction was it rattled me a little bit. I was reliving all these stories. I would like to thank the jury for their diligent work, and the Hillman Foundation and Unifor for supporting investigative journalism in these trying times. Newsrooms around the world are facing cutbacks, dealing with struggling resources. But we're still at it. As far as the series in the Montreal Gazette, which this year will mark its 245th anniversary, as I believe the oldest continuously publishing newspaper in the country. And I see here, I met Andrew Phillips. I bumped into him. He's a former Gazette editor-in-chief, and Michael Cook, who was my teacher, and he was an editor at the Gazette back in the day. So as far as the series is concerned, this was an incredibly difficult project because how do you prove systemic neglect? The last thing I wanted was for the authorities to say that this was an isolated incident. It couldn't just be one death. It had to be more than one death. And so I would like to thank profoundly my sources who risked their careers, and there's a whole subplot about that, but I was often on the phone with them for weeks on end till 4 a.m. going over that. And it was a challenge to reverse engineer, if you will, to be able to speak to the families, some of whom I'm still in contact with. So the impact, as Neil was saying, there was impact. So often journalists lament the fact that our reporting does not trigger change. Fortunately, in this case, there was change. But let me make it clear that this crisis, Lakeshore, is emblematic of an emergency room crisis that's gripping the nation from coast to coast, even tonight, that will probably get worse before it gets better. And so that's why, in part, I want to shine the light on the Lakeshore. At the very least, they've made these positive changes to this hospital, but the problems are deep-seated and remain. Even after these prizes were announced, Quebec's ombudsperson released a report, and this I find chilling, because I didn't really come across this in my investigation, but this is a problem that exists too in this country. And I believe the Globe and Mail wrote about this 20 odd years ago, which is elderly patients in ERs being placed in physical restraints, not as a last resort, but because there's a shortage of staff and a growing number of elderly patients. And this is what the Ombudsperson's report highlighted at the Lakeshore, that it's become routine, not as a last resort, patients becoming, in a sense, prisoners, strapped to beds because there's just not enough staff. And you can be sure that this is something that I will continue to probe in the coming months and years. Thank you so much, everyone.